One of the things that I love most about my show is that when I travel the world, a lot of people tell me that we inspire them to want to bake. We inspire them to, want to go to culinary school.
The accident should have ended Buddy Vallastro's career. A machine malfunction left the Cake Boss star with a badly injured hand. The very hand he depended on to build his cakes, his business, and his entire identity. But that wasn't the only thing changing. Cake Boss was disappearing from television, while Buddy's life was taking a turn fans never saw coming. So, what happened to Buddy after Cake Boss? And how did he rebuild the career he nearly lost?
Can't move this finger 100% over, but I got to get one more surgery so that I can get that finger over. See how it's like, as I spread it?
Maybe we'll put some filler in here to,
Maybe we'll put a little filler. I'll put some face filler in there.
Join us as we take a look at Buddy Vallastro from Cake Boss and see where he is now. The man who got bigger. The thing people assume when a reality show disappears is that the person on it kind of disappears too. That is not what happened to Buddy. TLC's original Cake Boss wrapped up in December of 2020 after a run that started back in 2009. But if you think that meant Buddy went and got a normal job, you clearly have not checked his television lineup lately. Work kept moving steadily after that, mostly through spin-off projects like Buddy Vallastro's Cake Dynasty, which features the exact same family managing the exact same business, and Legends of the Fork, a travel format built around eating at other people's restaurants instead of running one. Neither show generates the viral hype of the original series, but both projects keep cameras rolling and keep the bakery brand relevant in pop culture. And the bakery itself has not exactly stayed small. Carlo's Bakery now operates multiple locations across the country, ships products online, and even has an international outpost in Brazil that Buddy visited to celebrate its 5th anniversary. There are cake vending machines scattered through several Canadian cities now, which sounds like a joke until you realize people genuinely line up for them. He has restaurants too, including Buddy V's Ristorante at the Venetian in Las Vegas, Pizza Cake, the Boss Cafe, and Buddy's Jersey Eats. And as recently as June of 2026, he expanded that Vegas footprint again by opening a speakeasy called Dolce Notte, tucked inside his flagship restaurant, serving cocktails and small bites to people who wander in through what is essentially a hidden door. His net worth in 2026 sits somewhere around $10 million, built off cookbooks, endorsement deals, dog treats of all things, and a level of hustle that clearly did not slow down just because the flagship show ended. So if people were picturing Buddy sitting at home wondering what happened to his career, he basically just quietly rebuilt the empire around new shows and new cities, while a chunk of his old audience assumed he had disappeared, the hardcore fans. People always ask what happened to him, mostly because anyone watching around 2020 remembers the nightmare headline that made everyone freeze. Back in September of that year, the celebrity baker survived one of the worst accidents possible for someone who builds cakes for a living. The whole thing went down in the bowling alley built inside a New Jersey home. A pin setter machine jammed, so a hand went into the cage mechanism to free a stuck pin. The machine caught the right hand, trapping and crushing it inside the unit. Nothing tests a cake decorator's luck quite like playing mechanic with heavy bowling machinery at home. A metal rod roughly 1.5 inches long slowly and repeatedly impaled his hand 3 separate times between his ring finger and middle finger, and he was stuck there for more than 5 minutes before anyone could help him. It was his own teenage sons, 16-year-old Buddy Jr. and 13-year-old Marco, who grabbed a reciprocating saw and cut through the metal rod to free their father. He went straight into emergency surgery first at a hospital near home, and then with a specialist in Manhattan. And what followed was not a quick fix. Buddy ended up needing 5 separate surgeries over roughly 3 years to reconstruct a hand that had been shredded from the inside. He talked openly about the recovery the whole way through, joking at one point that the tendon damage left him permanently unable to fully extend his middle finger, which he found darkly funny given how often he'd probably want to use exactly that gesture. What nobody really knows is whether Buddy will ever have another hit as big as Cake Boss. His vending machines, Vegas restaurants, and shows like Legends of the Fork have kept his name out there. But Cake Boss was different. At its peak, millions of people were watching, and Buddy became famous far beyond the baking world. Recreating that kind of success is not easy, and Buddy seems to understand that. Instead of trying to make the same show famous all over again, he has spent the last few years building different businesses and trying new things. Whether that turns out to be the smarter move in the long run is still anyone's guess. Getting 95% of his hand function back sounds incredible, but that number doesn't really tell you just how close Buddy came to losing the career his hands had built. So what exactly happened that night? And how did a simple problem with his home bowling alley turn into an accident this brutal? The night everything changed. The headlines called it a hand injury. But that makes what happened sound way less serious than it actually was. Buddy wasn't dealing with a bad cut or a nasty sprain. He was trying to fix the pin setter on the bowling alley inside his home when the machine malfunctioned and trapped his hand. And we're talking about a full mechanical pin setter here. Hence, the accident was closer to something you'd expect on a factory floor than during a normal evening at home with the family. He later described the moment to Inside Edition in visceral detail, saying the mechanism worked like a fork and that the metal rod ripped straight through his ring finger and pointer finger before he could process what was happening. Looking back, the wildest detail is how quiet everything stayed while the machine was crushing flesh. Reports later showed no screaming meltdown, just clear instructions barked out to 2 terrified kids on how to operate a power saw and cut metal. After getting rushed to the emergency room, the immediate priority became posting a picture of the bandaged arm on social media with a cheeky caption asking followers for feedback on the new fashion choice. Nothing highlights modern priorities quite like using a gruesome freak accident to farm engagement numbers on social media. That kind of composure under pressure is not really surprising once you know how much of Buddy's career had already been built on staying steady while a kitchen full of stressed-out bakers loses its mind around him. Every episode of the original show basically hinged on him keeping his cool while a wedding cake collapsed or a client changed an order 2 hours before delivery. So strangely, the bowling machine disaster was just a much higher stakes version of the exact skill set he had been demonstrating on camera for a decade already. That same dark humor stayed around during the entire recovery, which felt completely on brand for anyone following the bakery show for years. The guy always possessed a rare ability to acknowledge a total disaster without crumbling into a mess. Facing a freak injury that easily could have destroyed a lifelong career just turned into another punchline. Nothing keeps the brand alive quite like laughing off a near-career-ending disability for the camera. But the hand accident wasn't the first time Buddy had been forced to figure out how to keep going after something completely changed his life. Years earlier, he had suffered a loss far more personal. And could that have been the moment Cake Boss really started to change? The family's biggest loss, pinpointing why the show began to stall out way before the 2020 accident, means going back to 2017, when the family matriarch Mary Valastro died from ALS at 69. The whole battle with the disease played out behind closed doors for years. The final announcement came straight from social media, with a post claiming the struggle ended and pitching a comforting visual about dancing in heaven with a long-lost spouse. Mary was far from just a side character in the business. She married Buddy Sr. back in 1965, right after buying Carlo's Bakery in Hoboken together. The two built the shop from scratch while raising 5 children, right up until Buddy Jr. took over the operations in 1994 following his father's death. Nothing screams traditional family legacy quite like passing down decades of bakery labor to the next generation. After Mary died, Buddy took a 2-year break from Cake Boss, and the show kept airing without him, with the rest of the family running the shop in his absence. He came back in 2019, but the show he returned to was never quite the same, and it went quiet for good the following year. He has credited his mother repeatedly as the source of his work ethic, once saying flatly that she was the strongest and most amazing woman he had ever known. Connecting the dots between that death and the show's slow collapse is pretty straightforward. Losing the person who literally co-founded the business being run on camera changes everything. Doing that job in front of millions loses its appeal fast, even if contracts and force of habit keep the cameras rolling for a bit longer. Nothing keeps a television production running quite like contractual obligation overriding genuine personal grief. But grief was not the only difficult chapter Buddy had to navigate while Cake Boss was at its peak. A few years earlier, one late-night drive had landed him in handcuffs. But how did an arrest involving the Cake Boss himself somehow become a scandal? His career survived almost untouched? The complicated DUI arrest. Long before all the drama, back in November 2014, a very public and very embarrassing arrest went down that still pops up online as a classic reminder of past mistakes. Cops pulled over a bright yellow Corvette in Manhattan around 1 in the morning after watching the sports car weave wildly between lanes near Penn Station. Nothing screams subtle and low-key quite like swerving through Manhattan traffic in a bright yellow Corvette after midnight. He failed a field sobriety test, and according to the arresting officers, he was less than cooperative about the whole thing, allegedly telling them, "You can't arrest me, I'm the Cake Boss," and insisting multiple times that he was a good guy who didn't need to be handcuffed. Spoiler, that argument did not work, and he spent the night in jail. He pleaded guilty about 2 weeks later, was fined $300, had his license suspended for 90 days, and had to complete a drunk driving program. To his credit, he did not try to spin it or minimize it publicly. He tweeted an apology saying he was very disappointed in himself and that he'd learned the hard way that even one drink is one too many behind the wheel. It's the kind of moment that could have genuinely damaged a family-friendly reality star's brand, and yet it barely dented his career, probably because he owned the mistake immediately rather than making excuses, which is honestly a lesson plenty of celebrities still haven't learned a decade later. Being a boss at 17. Part of the reason Buddy can talk about setbacks without sounding like he's ready to give up is probably that starting over is not exactly new to him. Carlo's Bakery was already part of his life long before television came along. His father, Bartolo Valastro Sr., bought the Hoboken Bakery in the 1960s, and Buddy started working there when he was just 11, washing pots and pans while growing up around the business with his 4 older sisters. Then, in 1994, his father died, and Buddy suddenly found himself running the entire operation at 17, years before reality television ever existed as a career path for anyone. He's talked about how brutal that transition actually was, admitting that plenty of bakers who had worked there for 30 years were not exactly thrilled to take instructions from a teenager, no matter whose son he was. He had to earn their respect the hard way, leaning on something his father had told him about respect never being handed to you just because of your last name. That early experience of getting knocked down and having to prove himself all over again is basically the same pattern that shows up throughout his adult life. Whether it is a mangled hand, a public arrest, or a show ending. He has been rebuilding since he was a teenager, so doing it again in his 40s probably felt less like a crisis and more like Tuesday. One of the more genuinely charming threads in Here's Him Now is that the show has not just followed Buddy. It's followed his entire family aging in real time. And that includes his 4 kids with his wife Lisa, whom he married back in 2001. The 2 sons who cut him out of that bowling machine in 2020, Buddy Jr. and Marco, were teenagers at the time, and they are both essentially adults now who show up regularly on Cake Dynasty. Buddy has talked with visible pride about milestones that probably sound small until you remember his own history, like mentioning on the show that his son Buddy was the first person named Buddy Valastro to ever actually graduate high school, which lands harder once you know Buddy himself left school early to work at the bakery. Outside the bakery, other members of Buddy's family have also built their own following online. His sister Madalena and her husband Mauro share cooking videos, while the rest of the Valastro family has helped turn one small bakery in Hoboken into a family brand that has lasted for generations. A big reason it works is that the family feels real. The arguments and sibling drama on Cake Boss never felt completely fake. It often just felt like a normal family trying to work together without driving each other crazy. But Buddy clearly wasn't interested in keeping the family business small or living off Cake Boss nostalgia forever. So how did one little Hoboken bakery turn into an empire that now reaches far beyond anything the original show ever imagined? The growing empire. If people thought the Vegas Speakeasy was the strangest expansion move, that is actually not even the most surprising thing Buddy's done with the brand recently. In 2024, Carlo's Bakery quietly opened a flagship location right in the middle of Times Square, putting Buddy's Cakes a few blocks from Broadway theaters instead of tucked away in Hoboken, where the whole thing started. He described walking around that neighborhood as feeling like the American dream in action, which, coming from a guy whose own father emigrated from Italy to open a small bakery, is not just a marketing line. It's basically the literal arc of his family's story playing out in real time. That kind of expansion says something about how Buddy actually approaches the brand now compared to how it worked during the original show's run. Back then, Carlo's was essentially one location that got famous because cameras happened to be pointed at it. Now, the bakery operates more like an actual national and international company, with the Hoboken original still functioning as the emotional home base, while the newer locations, the vending machines, the restaurants, and the licensed grocery store cake lines all generate revenue independently of whether anyone is watching a TV show that week. Having different ways to make money turned out to be much smarter than depending on TV ratings every week. That is a big reason Buddy and his family kept growing even after Cake Boss stopped being the huge show it once was. Today, Buddy doesn't seem like someone desperately trying to bring back his old TV fame. He simply moved on and built a business that could make money with or without a television show. Turns out, selling cakes, opening new businesses, and putting your name on products is a pretty good backup plan when TV viewers move on to something else. The hand that once looked like it might end his career is functioning well enough that he's still hand-decorating cakes on camera. The business has expanded into new cities and new formats, including a literal hidden speakeasy that feels like a pretty on-brand next move for a guy who has always liked a bit of theater. The DUI is a decade plus in the rearview mirror and mostly survives now as an internet throwback story rather than an ongoing controversy. And the family that used to be background characters on Cake Boss are now adults running parts of the empire themselves. What nobody really knows is whether Buddy will ever have another hit as big as Cake Boss. His vending machines, Vegas restaurants, and shows like Legends of the Fork have kept his name out there. But Cake Boss was different. At its peak, millions of people were watching, and Buddy became famous far beyond the baking world. Recreating that kind of success isn't easy, and Buddy seems to understand that. Instead of trying to make the same show famous all over again, he spent the last few years building different businesses and trying new things. Whether that turns out to be the smarter move in the long run is still anyone's guess. Do you think Buddy's current empire is actually more impressive than the Cake Boss fame that started it? Or was there something about the original show that all this expansion can't replace? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.